Let's get scratching.
This past September was the 25th anniversary of the Sega Dreamcast's American launch. Sega's final console was so ahead of its time, and it featured some of the most diverse lineups of exclusives, especially for a system that was only in active production for a few short years. It's really hard to deny the extreme variety of games that Sega was putting out. Despite being late to the party, I personally got a Dreamcast around 2014, 2015. I really enjoyed the variety of arcadey experiences that Sega was putting out back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Between Sonic Adventure, Space Channel 5, and so many other exclusives, it was pretty clear that Sega wasn't going down without a fight.
Sonic Adventure on Sega Dreamcast. It's thinking.
Sega at the time had focused their development teams into a set of semi-autonomous studios where each was given a level of creative freedom that we almost never see. One of those teams would use that newfound freedom to create Jet Set Radio for the Dreamcast. Jet Set Radio launched in 2000 in Japan and was later released as a new version with bonus content in North America, where its name was changed to Jet Grind Radio. Even compared to other Sega games, Jet Set Radio stands apart with how inspired its art style is. The original game's combination of cel-shaded graphics and graffiti-inspired art style make it just another of Sega's most unique and iconic games. I always felt that Sega has some of the most unique IP in the game industry, and even among that crowd, Jet Set Radio stands on its own. With the anniversary of the Dreamcast and Sega recently announcing a revival to the series, it seems that the games are due for a second look. So let's take a look at the original Jet Set Radio on Sega Dreamcast. Jet Grind Radio, or Jet Set Radio, starts out in Tokyo To, an alternate universe Tokyo where street punk gangs with a love for graffiti, dancing, and a pirate radio station are constantly at odds with state authorities. A coalition between the wealthy Rokaku group and the police have made it harder for the local punks called Rudies to do their thing. The premise is pretty silly, but it's easy to get behind. Jet Grind Radio is firmly set in the street culture and graffiti culture at the time, and because of this, there's a cute little warning telling you not to do this when you start the game. Just in case you're about to do a little vandalism, Sega does not approve. For the record, I played through the Steam version first and then replayed it on Dreamcast. I'm probably going to use most of my Dreamcast footage, but if it's suddenly in widescreen, that's the PC version. Also, I realize I've been bouncing between Jet Set and Jet Grind Radio, but they mean the same thing. After an unnecessarily long tutorial, you get to start the main game. Jet Set Radio's gameplay at its core is actually really straightforward. You can collect spray cans to use on preset locations and tag them with your graffiti. Smaller tags can be done on the spot, but large ones need you to stop and do a set of combos on the control stick. By doing the combos in a row, you earn extra points, and if you mess up, you lose the can. So it's best to learn your selected character's combo. As you spray more graffiti, more police will show up to stop you, with increasingly ridiculous methods. Within a few levels, they'll be sending tanks and helicopters to stop you. Tag all the red arrows in the time limit, and you finish the stage. The plot follows your gang, known as the GGs, as you try to take over the city one tag at a time. Neighboring gangs will try to take your turf, and you'll retaliate by covering all their art with your own. And after every mission, your progress will be updated by this lovably loud DJ, Professor K.
Jet Set Radio!
At the start of the game, you join up with two others to form the GGs. You got Beat, the main playable character, as well as Gum and Tab. As you progress, you'll collect more party members to play as by completing rival challenges to earn their respect. The playable cast of characters are all really fun. Everyone's got their own stats with higher health pools and different graffiti inputs. In a lot of ways, the character selection is more of a difficulty selection. The more difficult combos give you a better score, but those characters tend to have less health. Every time you unlock a character, it's a little reward in itself to see where they hang out in the menu, and selecting them shows you their signature dance move. I love how every character in these games just never stop breaking it down. It's really funny and really cool at the same time, and I just never get tired of it. The diegetic menu is also really cool to see. I don't know if diegetic is the correct term here, but it's a menu that's in a physical space. From the main menu, you can also select graffiti, which you can unlock by finding pickups in the levels. You can also design your own graffiti with this relatively well-made designer. And of course, I had to put my little dude there. I believe that originally you could share the graffiti online through the internet, but obviously those features aren't quite as accessible anymore.
Jet Set Radio! We got another letter from Osaki. He says, I burned my house down. What should I do now? How should I know, fool?
So, once you do more missions, you'll end up in new levels where you have to chase gangs away by spraying their backs. These segments are a bit more of a drag compared to the standard levels, since they force you to make laps around until you just happen to catch them in a good position to just spam the spray button. Difficulty in Jet Set Radio feels a little out of control sometimes, where one level could take you 10 minutes and another could take you 3. On my second playthrough, I did get a bit better at these levels, but it doesn't mean that I particularly enjoyed them. While the gameplay is fun overall, I think that the getting around part can be a bit more challenging. To start, you're strapped into these rollerblades the entire time. There's no way to walk normally without rolling around. You can do a little dash to gain some speed and grind on rails, but the controls will absolutely take some getting used to. Turning tightly isn't really an option, and jumping around is pretty stiff, even for a game from 2000. And so you have to rely on grind rails and tricks to get anywhere in a reasonable amount of time. But the problem is, tricking can also force you in a position that you don't want to be in, because of how stiff the jumping is. If you can't wrap your head around the way the grinding and trick system works, then you probably won't be able to get around at a reasonable pace at all. In a way, the physics make sense, but they also make things feel a little strange and unintuitive. Getting on and off of rails can be challenging at times, and the collision can feel confusing. Landing on a rail without any speed also just glues you to it, and it forces you to take a really long, slow jump off of it. It can create some really cumbersome and maybe even frustrating moments. But the moment-to-moment gameplay, when it actually works, feels pretty great. If you have enough speed, you can jump to perform a set of tricks, which give you a really satisfying burst of speed and height. The floaty jump physics work in the game's favor sometimes, and give you a bit more control over where you're landing. Rolling downhill is also just a blast to do when you're given the chance to pick up some speed. Inputting those combos for the graffiti also feels stiff at first, but with some practice, you can actually get pretty good at them. Performing a full graffiti combo on a large wall can be pretty fun and actually kind of replicates that feeling of making large sweeping motions with a paint can. I also really love how the wall riding works in Jet Set Radio. Grinding and wall riding will always be faster than straight mashing the dash trigger, and so it incentivizes you to create lines around the levels with practice and map knowledge. And it's not all up to you to learn where to wall ride, because the rival challenges will actually teach you some map knowledge and give you shortcuts that you can use the next time you play the level. In this section of Koganecho, you can go the long way around this bridge through this house to get to this one part, but if you know what to do, you can just wall ride and jump across the gap. That knowledge, coupled with the game's short runtime and preset graffiti locations, makes Jet Grind Radio really fun to replay in order to beat your score or just to go through casually on a weekend. I think with enough time and experience with Jet Set Radio, the game actually only gets more fun.
That's right.
I think that if you're a fan of Jet Set Radio, or you're really just aware of it at all, you're waiting for me to talk about the best part of the game. All of that gameplay is surrounded by a beautifully realized aesthetic. I stand pretty firm in the camp of people that can enjoy media on vibes alone, and Jet Set Radio's vibes are some of the best in the biz. The art style is just so striking. From the colorful graphic design in the menus to this beautiful depiction of Tokyo's iconic districts, the game never lets its identity slip for a second. And thanks to that bold art direction, the game looks great on even dated hardware and scales really well all the way up to modern platforms. Though some spots like textures can show the age of the game, when you see Jet Set Radio, you know it's Jet Set Radio. And even if you can't see it, you can definitely hear it. That soundtrack, primarily composed by Hideki Naganuma, is iconic. Naganuma's musical style uses loads of samples and all sorts of things to create a unique sound that, at least in the game industry, is really all his own. His work in the first Jet Set Radio is fantastic and never gets old throughout the entire runtime. The main menu music has got a great beat to it that is so earwormy and makes you want to dance along with all the characters. I've been playing these songs throughout the video, but here are some of my favorites.
That shit, homie!
When I first played Jet Set Radio, I didn't feel like the music quite clicked with me, but then I realized that I never forgot those songs. And every time I think back to the game, I think about that music. Before I move ahead, I also want to talk about the different versions of Jet Set Radio. Jet Grind Radio, like I mentioned before, was a Dreamcast game released in the year 2000 as an enhanced port of the original Japanese game. It has a few new maps based on New York, which make up a new chapter of the game. The two American characters are still around in the original game, but they function just like the other unlockable characters. Also, it looks like Cube had a slightly different design. Back in 2011, the game got ported to the then modern consoles and Steam by a studio called Blit. The Steam version is really solid and has a few small changes, but nothing really major. A few music tracks had to get moved around, and I think they removed Dragula, which sucks.
Over there!
The graffiti camera for small tags is off by default, which is kind of a good thing, but I prefer it on. The menus are also slightly less cohesive with the art style since they had to add new features. But the biggest change is the addition of right stick camera control, which I think is pretty objectively an improvement. I think it makes general navigation a lot clearer and gives you a much easier way to look around the levels. If you're looking to play Jet Set Radio today, I'd probably just say go get the Steam version for cheap.
Oh, I can see them run about the town. I can hear them all sing. Listen to the music.
Let's talk about the end of the game. As you've been going through, the GGs have found these weird parts of a record, which apparently is cursed and can summon a demon. A new faction called the Golden Rhinos show up, and you're given 3 final missions to complete. These last few levels are in some ways the best and some ways the worst. I love how they make use of every section of each level, since every stage has mostly taken place in a portion of a larger map. What I really have an issue with, though, is the absolute enemy spam in some of these stages. You don't really have an option to retaliate against enemies, so most of the time you have to choose to either eat that damage or just waste time running away, which really only buys you a few seconds. I'd say most of the time I would just decide to tank the damage and spam the graffiti as much as I could. In a way, it's an appropriate challenge, but sometimes I couldn't tell if I was doing something wrong. If you've played these sections and you know exactly how to deal with these, maybe I'm just missing something, let me know. After that, you do one last chase mission that was really easy for some reason, and then you're off to the final boss.
Goji wants to use the record to make a contract with a demon so he can take over Tokyo and the rest of the world.
At this point, you already know what to do here. A bit of platforming, a bit of spraying, the giant rhino blows up for some reason, and then you can spray the big bad guy in the face. That's it. It's an easy, fun boss, and it's over before you know it. It turns out that the record wasn't really cursed after all, no crazy plot twist or anything, all's back to normal, and the gang can dance on the spot in peace. Looks like the day is saved. Despite all these control issues and other snags along the way, I find Jet Set Radio is just so easy to love. Whether it's the earwormy soundtrack that hasn't got out of my head since I played the game 10 years ago, or those goofy little dances that everyone does the entire runtime, Jet Set Radio is just so memorable because it's not afraid to be weird. After the game's over, you aren't really given all that much to do. You can explore to find the remaining graffiti souls, or replay the game to try to earn the jet rank in every level. Typically, I like to replay games more than I like to complete them 100%, and I think that eventually, I'll be back to try it out again. I mentioned that Jet Set Radio got a few spin-offs and sequels, and I wanted to talk about the Game Boy Advance version since it shares the same name as the first game. Let's have a quick look at the handheld version of Jet Set Radio.
Jet Grind Radio!
Jet Set on GBA actually was developed separately from the original game after it had already been out for quite some time. It even came out after Jet Set Radio Future on Xbox, but it still follows that first game. Vicarious Visions was responsible for the Game Boy Advance version, and it was published in America by THQ. For one reason or another, Jet Set Radio was historically not as popular in Japan, and so this version never made it there. If you could feasibly make a low-budget version of a game, it ended up on GBA. We had Doom on there, Link to the Past, Grand Theft Auto. A lot of these ports are pretty hit or miss, but let's see how they did with Jet Set Radio. To start, I was pretty surprised how faithful the game is to the original Dreamcast version. Once you actually get into the game, I think the graphics are pretty impressive for the Game Boy Advance. It reminds me a lot of those Tony Hawk games that came out on the system. A lot of music made it through the conversion, thankfully, but the voiceovers are really rough.
Let's look at the fun.
But really, the entire package is here. You can play as most of the characters, you can input graffiti combos, and you even get the Jet Grind Radio bonus levels. The storyline is also carried over in full, so in a way, you've got a full 2D demake of a Dreamcast game. But at the end of the day, Jet Set Radio was never conceived to be a 2D isometric game, and you really just can't replicate that level design in a way that really represents the game. They did their best here with the assignment they were given, and I suppose that's all you can ask for. I can't say I'd recommend playing this version over any of the actual 3D versions, but it is a novelty. A legit copy can also cost you a bit more than it's probably worth, but it is a Game Boy Advance game, and you can play this thing literally anywhere in 5 minutes. But like I said, it is a novelty, and these days it's kind of just an interesting anecdote. After the first Jet Set Radio released, it would see sequels and spiritual successors over time. Jet Set Radio Future on the original Xbox, from what little I've played of it, seems like a really great time. I love that first game, so I'm definitely going to check it out soon. I've also been playing through the indie successor to Jet Set, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, and if you're a fan of Jet Set and somehow haven't given that one a shot, I promise you won't be disappointed. Honestly, Bomb Rush was the reason I made this video in the first place. Speaking of Jet Set Radio Future and Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, I do want to do a video talking about them, and if that's something that you want to see, let me know down below. SEGA recently announced that they're rebooting a lot of their classic franchises, and Jet Set Radio was one of them. While it's not clear yet if it's a Jet Set Radio 3 or a remake of the original game, the change in art style is a bit jarring for me. That, along with the rumors of the game going open world, seem like they're making a big leap into modernizing the series. I'm gonna hold out hope since we haven't really seen anything yet, but I do hope that the new game looks back and learns from the first game. It looks like the new movement abilities might make traversal easier, but could also trivialize getting from point A to B. I really hope that they keep the graffiti editor and the large cast of characters. There's a lot of room in this sort of genre to expand on. I'd love to see an expansion of the trick system and a focus more on the momentum that isn't quite as important in Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. The feel of the new game might not be exactly like the originals, but I'm really just glad that SEGA acknowledged the Jet Set Radio games at all. I'm still looking forward to that reboot either way.
Let's look at the fun.
With that said, that's all I've got today. I hope you enjoyed coming along for this video, and if you did, leave me a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Getting that support helps motivate me to make more of these videos and lets you know when the next one is coming. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.